Hey, Lasash here. Let me share with you 4 stories that I thought were interesting this week. The first one deals with technologies and AI used by law enforcement. Before we talk about the actual article, about ShotSpotter, let's talk about something you're more familiar with. Let's discuss body cam footage. If you watch my channel, I know you're very familiar with body cam footage. You watch a lot of it. But here's some things you never thought about. The perspective of the video. The footage always comes from the camera that's mounted on the chest of the police officer. Because it is mounted lower than the eyesight, most of the individuals that the law enforcement will encounter will look taller and much more intimidating than they were in real life. And of course, that footage will have a prejudicial effect on the jury. And it also has a prejudicial effect on you. When you watch that video, you're seeing it in a completely different perspective than what the police officer saw. The second issue, of course, with this technology is that if you ever watched body cam footage from the very beginning, you realized that the video comes in, but the audio doesn't kick in until a few seconds later. That's because when the officer hits the record button on the body cam, the video has been pre-recorded up to a minute and a half in most circumstances. Most of these companies can do up to a minute, minute and a half of pre-recording. And so then you have this video without any sound. That's of course problematic. A lot of my clients often tell me that they already spoke to the officer and they said something important, but it was never captured on the audio. You can see them talking on the video, but there is no audio. And of course, a lot of these newer cameras now come with facial recognition. That's the AI component there. And with facial recognition, new questions come in about the constitutionality and what it would do with this footage. Can law enforcement actually use facial recognition? That's a good question. But today, let's focus on the article, and it deals with ShotSpotter. If you're not familiar with this company, they have sold their device to a lot of law enforcement agencies throughout the country. It is a device that's mounted on the top of a light post, and it tries to figure out whether there's a shot that's being fired in the vicinity of that device. Of course, some of the sound engineers tell us that the device is not accurate. It is very difficult to figure out whether something is a firearm shot or not. And that's because there's a lot of variables. If you have a lot of buildings around the ShotSpotter, that will change how the sound travels. If you have a lot of wind, that will have an effect as well. So of course, some people are critiquing whether this technology works. Whenever we use this technology in court, usually it's the prosecutor that's bringing it in, the question becomes, how reliable is it? And it's hard to know. And that's because the owners, the people who made ShotSpotter, do not send anyone into court to testify about how their program, how their AI works. They're trying to protect their intellectual property. They don't want to share it with anybody because, of course, that's where the money's at. And so now we have this technology that nobody really knows how it's used, how it actually performs. Well, this week we do know something. A study came out of New York, and auditors discovered the controversial gunshot detection system ShotSpotter wasted officers' time with false alerts, identifying gunshots correctly only 13% of the time. The city has spent more than $45 million on the technology and must now decide whether to renew its contract. So a lot of money being spent on something that works only 13% of the time. And of course, as a criminal defense attorney, then I have other questions. What happens when the officer goes on the scene and this thing is not accurate? Well, surprisingly, in some of these studies, people have found out that individuals were still arrested. And you would think, how? Well, the officer comes out because he has a notification from ShotSpotter. He sees an individual in close vicinity. He does a stop and frisk and finds narcotics. Now, this case has nothing to do with firearms, but now there's a charge stemming off of something that police officer found, narcotics. So we have a drug case that originated in a really weird way and maybe unconstitutional way. So something to think about. This is a big story about ShotSpotter, and so I will link it in the description below. If you're interested in this topic, read about it a little bit more. The second item has to do with the postal officials telling Congress something that we probably already knew. Postal inspectors need warrants to search inside American mail, but gathering information from the outside of the package and envelopes is fair game. Turns out law enforcement have used this loophole hundreds of thousands of times in the last decade. That's what the postal officials told Congress this week. The IRS, FBI, Department of Homeland Security routinely asks for days or weeks worth of information, like names, addresses, from the mail of people they're investigating. Postal inspectors say they provide this information only in limited circumstances, but in practice, the numbers show they rarely say no. Now, this is of course something we probably already knew. This is your plain view doctrine. Whatever you write on the outside of your mail, you expose it to the world, and so law enforcement, just like any other citizen, can look and read your envelope. And so, of course, they're gathering information, trying to figure out some of the people they investigate, who they're communicating with, where they're sending packages, and so on. This is something we see every day in any drug case. So if you're interested in this topic, again, I will link it below. My third topic deals with Wikileaks. I'm sure you've heard it all over the news that on Monday, Julian Assange, the founder of Wikileaks, agreed to plead guilty to a single felony count of illegally obtaining and disclosing national security information. He refused extradition to United States mainland. Instead, he pled guilty in the islands, a U.S. territory called Northern Mariana Islands. Of course, the interesting thing here is that we've been running after this guy for the last over a decade now, and at the end of the day, he receives no time. He pleads guilty to something that's only one count. It's a felony count, but at the end of the day, he just goes home. So the question for me is, why do we waste so many resources, so much money to bring him before the court, and at the end, we're not even trying to prosecute this individual? And finally, the fourth topic deals with former presidents. It is not every day that we see a former president being convicted of a crime, but here this week we did. United States Court has handed down a 45-year sentence to Juan Orlando Hernandez on drug smuggling charges. By the way, he was the former president of Honduras. He was the president from 2014 to 2022. In this case, the prosecution accused him of running Honduras like a narco state and paving a cocaine superhighway to the United States. He, of course, maintains his innocence just like any former president would. If you're interested in any of these topics, I will link them in the description below. I will see you next Wednesday when we'll go into a deep dive on one case, probably from the Ninth Circuit, the Supreme Court, or some other jurisdiction. And every Friday, I give you these informal videos on some of the topics I saw in the days prior. Thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button. Share this video with your friends and family. If you're listening to the podcast version of this recording on Audible or Spotify, please give my podcast a 5-star review rating. And finally, if you want to support this channel, consider going to loststash.com and check out some of my merch, including the Do Not Arrest This Person t-shirts. Thanks for watching.